That night, in front of a tray of charity roasted chicken at St. Calder's Church Hall, my mother looked right at me. "Let Tessa's kids eat first," she instructed. "Tell yours to wait for the leftovers." My two children froze, their eyes fixed on their empty plastic plates. My sister simply smiled, lifting the lid from the serving dish, as if it were a familiar ritual. I didn't argue. I just took out my phone, hit record, and began a plan to turn leftovers into corporate evidence. My name is Mara Lane. I am 34 years old. On that particular Tuesday night, I was standing in line for what was billed as a celebratory dinner. The West Haven Harvest Fund's annual fundraiser was held in the cavernous, echoing hall of St. Calder's Church, a place that always smelled of lemons, industrial floor cleaner, and the faint sweet decay of old hymn books. Tonight, a new scent was layered on top of the thick, savory aroma of roasted chicken and gravy, a smell so aggressively wholesome it felt like a lie. It was a smell meant to evoke home and comfort, but in the sterile, fluorescent-lit hall, it just mingled with the chemical tang of bleach, creating something cloying and vaguely medicinal. I stood with my two children, Evan, who was 8, and Mila, 6. They were quiet, holding their empty plastic plates with the solemnity of children who have been told to be on their best behavior. My parents, Ruth and Alan, were the event's organizers. My father, Alan, was hovering near the podium, a tall, perpetually distracted man who seemed most comfortable when observing life from a respectable distance. My mother, Ruth, was a different force entirely. She was at the head of the buffet line, a whirlwind of forced smiles and sharp, assessing glances, her floral dress a burst of color against the hall's beige walls. She wasn't just an organizer, she was the conductor of this small-town symphony of charity. And then there was my sister, Tessa. She arrived not as a guest or a volunteer, but as the evening star. She swept in with her husband, Colin, and their two children, looking radiant and effortless. Tessa had always been the star. She didn't have to work for the spotlight. It seemed to bend toward her naturally, a phenomenon my parents had encouraged since we were children. She was West Haven Springs' golden girl, and this fund, her mother's passion project, was her stage. We had been waiting for 15 minutes. Evan was shifting his weight from foot to foot, his stomach likely rumbling. Mila was tracing the rim of her plate with a small finger. The line moved slowly, a shuffling procession of neighbors and local business owners. When we were finally 3 people away from the serving trays, my mother caught my eye. She walked over, her smile tight, a public performance that did not reach her eyes. She leaned in, her voice a low, conspiratorial whisper that was nevertheless perfectly audible to the couple standing behind me. "Mara," she began. "Let Tessa's kids eat first," she said, the name itself a soft reprimand. "They've had a long day." She didn't look at Evan or Mila, her gaze was fixed on me, a drill bit of maternal expectation. "You can teach yours to wait for what's left. It's good for them to learn patience." There it was. The word leftovers. It wasn't the first time I'd heard it, it was the unofficial title of my childhood, the name for my portion, my turn, my place. Evan's shoulders slumped. He didn't say anything, but I saw the familiar motion as he lowered his head, his dark hair falling over his eyes. Mila's hand stilled on her plate. They had already learned this lesson. They knew the choreography of disappointment. They had been taught through 100 tiny gestures and clipped sentences that their hunger came second. I looked over at Tessa's children. My niece and nephew, bright and boisterous, were already at a table near the front. Taped to their shirts were laminated cards that read, "VIP Kids." The letters were outlined in cheap, shedding glitter. Tessa had probably made them herself, a cute little touch that was also a declaration of status. Her children were important. Mine were an afterthought. Tessa caught my gaze from across the room and offered a small, apologetic shrug, a gesture that said, "What can you do?" Mom's orders. But there was a gleam of triumph in her eyes. She thrived on this hierarchy. It was the soil in which her confidence had grown. The clatter of silverware on a ceramic plate cut through the low hum of conversation. A server was replacing an empty tray. The sound was sharp, metallic, and for a second, it wasn't a fork, but the edge of a memory scraping against a raw nerve. It was the sound of my own fork against a plate as a child, waiting at the dinner table while Tessa recounted her day, my parents hanging on every word. I would sit in silence, listening to the scrape and clink, the sound of being invisible, the sound of waiting for what was left. Tessa drifted over to the buffet line, a queen surveying her court. She leaned close to me, her perfume a cloud of expensive florals. "It's just the fund's priority rules," she whispered, as if sharing a secret. "The bigger donors get to go first. It encourages giving." She patted my arm, a gesture of condescending comfort. "It's just how it works, Mara." But this wasn't about a donation. I gave to the fund, a modest amount automatically deducted from my paycheck every month. This was about a system my mother had built and Tessa had perfected, a family charter written in invisible ink. A system where they were the priority and we were the footnote. For years, I had absorbed it. I had swallowed the slights, chewed on the resentment, and digested the injustice because it was easier than starting a war. I had told myself it was just my mother's way, just Tessa's personality. I had convinced myself that fighting would cause more pain than simply enduring. But looking at my children's bowed heads, seeing the glitter on my nephew's VIP tag, I realized my endurance had a cost, and my children were the ones paying it. Something inside me shifted. Not a loud crack, but a quiet, clean break. The part of me that accepted, that made excuses, that waited patiently for leftovers, simply ceased to exist. In its place was a cold, clear resolve. My hand moved to my wrist, my fingers finding the side of my smartwatch. It was a sleek, unassuming device from ArcLight Dynamics, the tech firm where I worked. I pressed a sequence of buttons on the side, a shortcut I had programmed myself. A tiny, haptic buzz confirmed that the microphone was active. The recording had begun. The ambient noise of the hall, the chatter, the clinking plates, the soft drone of the air conditioning was now being captured, stored, and time-stamped. Evan looked up at me then, his brown eyes wide with a question he didn't know how to ask. The question was a tangle of confusion and hurt. "Why, Mom? Why aren't we as important?" Evan looked up at me then, his brown eyes wide with a question he didn't know how to ask. The question was a tangle of confusion and hurt. "Why, Mom? Why aren't we as important?" He expected me to placate him, to tell him to be a good boy and wait. He expected me to enforce the family rules. I met his gaze and gave him a small, genuine smile. It felt like stretching a muscle I hadn't used in years. I leaned down, my voice for his ears only. "We are going to eat first," I promised him, my words soft but solid. "Just not here." His brow furrowed in confusion, but a tiny flicker of hope sparked in his eyes. He trusted me. And in that moment, I swore I would be worthy of that trust. As I straightened up, the plan was already forming in my mind, crystalline and sharp. It wasn't born of sudden rage, but of a clarity that had been years in the making. My family saw this dinner as another affirmation of their private world order. They were wrong. This was a business event, and my mother, my sister, and her husband were about to solicit a major corporate sponsorship from my company. My mind pulled up the document, the exact wording as clear as if it were on a screen in front of me. I had written it myself. I was Mara Lane, Director of Procurement for ArcLight Dynamics. I was the architect of the company's supply chain ethics and vendor compliance protocols. And 6 months ago, I had personally drafted Addendum 7.4b to our standard corporate sponsorship agreement. It was titled the Non-Discrimination, an equal access clause. It explicitly forbade any partner organization from creating a tiered or preferential system of access to services or benefits at company-sponsored events. It didn't matter if it was for donors, executives, or family members. It mandated equal treatment for all attendees. It was designed to prevent the exact kind of quiet, systemic favoritism that was playing out in this church hall. It was my professional firewall against my personal history. Tessa and my parents thought they were lobbying for a simple sponsorship deal with ArcLight Dynamics. They saw me as the family connection, the inside track. They had no idea that in trying to secure our company's money, they were about to run headlong into my company's rules. My rules. The recording on my watch continued, silently capturing my mother's instructions, my sister's justification, the entire rotten priority system they held so dear. This wasn't just a family dinner anymore. They had made it a corporate matter. And in my world, the world of compliance and contracts and consequences, there were no leftovers. There was only evidence. Growing up in West Haven Springs was an exercise in understanding physics, specifically the principle that two objects cannot occupy the same space at the same time. In our family, that space was the spotlight, and it was permanently occupied by Tessa. She was designated the Pride, a title bestowed upon her early and often. It meant she was the one whose crayon drawings were framed, whose mediocre piano recitals were lauded as concertos, and whose every whim was treated as a royal decree. I, by default, was the sensible one. It was a consolation prize, a label for being quiet, for not demanding attention, for understanding my role was to be the stable, low-maintenance foundation upon which Tessa's stage was built. This dynamic was most clearly codified at the dinner table. I must have been 7 or 8 the first time the rule was explicitly stated. My grandparents were visiting, and my mother, Ruth, was serving her signature pot roast. It was my favorite, and I had eagerly held out my plate. My mother paused, the serving fork hovering in the air. "We have guests, Mara," she said, her voice gentle but firm. A velvet glove over an iron policy. "Let Tessa have her portion first. She can tell Grandma and Grandpa about her spelling bee trophy." I remember the sting of it, the quiet shame as I pulled my plate back. Tessa, of course, beamed and launched into a dramatic retelling of her victory while I watched her get the best cut of meat. It wasn't a one-time occurrence. Let Tessa go first became the unwritten 11th commandment in our house. It applied to everything from picking a movie on Friday night to getting the first slice of birthday cake, even when it was my birthday. My father, Alan, was the family philosopher, the great rationalizer. When I was a teenager and finally old enough to voice my frustration, he would put a placating hand on my shoulder. "You're just so practical, Mara," he'd say, as if it were an unfortunate but incurable condition. "You see the world in black and white. Your sister, she's made for the spotlight. She has a light that needs to shine." He spoke of it as if Tessa were a delicate, exotic flower, and I was a sturdy, dependable potato. "Both have their place in the garden," his tone implied, "but only one is worthy of admiration." I learned to stop arguing. It was like arguing with the tide, you just ended up tired and salty. And so we grew into the roles they had assigned us. Tessa married Colin Morrow, a man whose ambition was as polished as his shoes. He fit seamlessly into our family's ecosystem. She took on the public relations for the West Haven Harvest Fund, a position that required her to do what she did best, shine. She was the face of the charity, attending luncheons, posing for the local paper, and leveraging her social charm to draw in donations. I, the sensible one, left West Haven Springs. I went to a state university, got a degree in business administration with a focus on supply chain management, and methodically built a career. I became the director of procurement at ArcLight Dynamics, a major player in the aerospace technology sector. My world was one of contracts, compliance, and requests for proposal. It was a world governed by clear, impartial rules. A world I had constructed brick by brick in direct opposition to the one I'd left behind. In my world, there was no spotlight. It was a world governed by clear, impartial rules. A world I had constructed brick by brick in direct opposition to the one I'd left behind. In my world, there was no spotlight. There were only metrics, deliverables, and the unassailable logic of a well-executed audit. The two worlds were never supposed to collide. But about a year ago, they began to drift into the same orbit. The West Haven Harvest Fund, under my mother's direction and Tessa's charm, had secured a significant sponsorship from Finch and Fowl Catering, the largest and most sought-after event provider in the state. Finch and Fowl was known for its gourmet food and impeccable service, a reputation that allowed them to command premium prices. Their logo started appearing on all the fund's promotional materials. 6 months later, a formal request for proposal landed on my desk at ArcLight. We were looking for a new vendor to manage our corporate cafeterias and executive dining services across 3 campuses. It was a massive, multi-year contract, a career-making deal for any catering company. And among the half-dozen bidders was a meticulously prepared, glossy proposal from Finch and Fowl Catering. As Director of Procurement, it was my job to ensure a fair and transparent bidding process. Any potential conflict of interest had to be declared. My family's connection to a major sponsor of a bidding company was a clear, flashing red light. I did my due diligence, starting with the West Haven Harvest Fund itself. As a registered 501(c)(3) charity, its financial records were a matter of public record. On a quiet Tuesday afternoon, I accessed their latest filings. The paperwork was sloppy, filled with vague descriptions and rounded numbers that made the accountant in me flinch. But buried in the supplementary documents for their annual donor gala, I found it. It was an internal planning brief, likely uploaded by mistake. It detailed a tiered benefit system for event attendees. It was a ladder of privilege. Small donors got standard seating. Mid-level donors got preferred tables. And at the very top were the patron-level benefactors. For them, the document outlined a priority access protocol which included a separate entrance, a private reception, and most notably, first call buffet service. The language was couched in corporate jargon, but the meaning was simple: the more you gave, the sooner you ate. It was my mother's "let Tessa eat first" rule, scaled up and monetised. The connection was immediate and sickening. Finch and Fowl, who sponsored the fund, was now bidding for a contract I oversaw. My family's fund was using a system of preferential treatment that directly violated the spirit, if not yet the letter, of ArcLight's vendor ethics code. I needed to see the fund's official tax filings, the Form 990, to understand the full financial relationship with their sponsors. I called my mother that evening. I kept my tone professional, explaining that since a potential ArcLight vendor was a major sponsor of her fund, I needed to review their public 990s as part of my conflict of interest assessment. The line went quiet for a moment. "Mara, really?" she finally said, her voice laced with the weary disappointment she reserved for when I was being too practical. "This is a family thing. It's charity. Don't bring your corporate laws into it." "It's not about laws, Mom," I said, keeping my own voice even. "It's about transparency. Finch and Fowl is bidding on a contract at my company. Their sponsorship of your fund could be perceived as an attempt to curry favor." "That's ridiculous," she scoffed. "They support our cause because they believe in it. You're seeing shadows where there are none." She refused to send the documents, telling me I could find them myself if I was so determined to turn a good deed into a federal investigation. Then she hung up. That conversation was the final signal. The warning light on my internal dashboard, which had been blinking yellow, turned a solid, screaming red. A conflict of interest was no longer a possibility, it was a certainty. My mother's dismissal, her attempt to wall off their operations behind the sacred barrier of family, was proof that there was something she didn't want me to see. She and Tessa were operating their charity with the same arbitrary, relationship-based rules that had governed our childhood home. And now they were attempting to bring that system into my territory, a territory built on fairness and accountability. So when I stood in that church hall smelling the bleach and the gravy, and my mother uttered that line, "Tell yours to wait for the leftovers," it was more than just a thoughtless, cruel remark. It wasn't just another verse in the family songbook. It was the clear, unambiguous articulation of a policy. It was the verbal confirmation of the tiered benefit system I had read about in their own documents. My children, by virtue of being mine and not Tessa's, were in a lower donor tier. Their status was predetermined. Their place was at the back of the line. The phrase leftovers was no longer just about a meal. It was a business model. It was a philosophy. And in the cold fluorescent light of St. Calder's Hall, with my phone silently recording, I decided it was a philosophy I was finally going to dismantle. They had brought their world to my doorstep. They had no idea I was about to introduce them to mine. The Monday after the fundraiser at St. Calder's, the smell of industrial-grade coffee replaced the cloying scent of roasted chicken and bleach. My office at ArcLight Dynamics is a minimalist space of glass, steel, and muted gray tones. It is a controlled environment, a place of process and protocol. It is my sanctuary. I sat at my desk before anyone else arrived, the city lights still glittering in the pre-dawn darkness, and began to build my wall. It would not be a wall of defense. It would be a wall of consequence. My first action was to open the master file for the corporate catering RFP. The document was a complex latticework of service-level agreements, health and safety requirements, and performance metrics. To an outsider, it was impenetrable. To me, it was clay. I drafted a new addendum, designated Section 11.7. The title was intentionally bland, Event Service Equity Protocol. Inside, the language was anything but. I composed the anti-perk priority clause. Each word chosen with surgical precision. It was a categorical prohibition of preferential treatment. The clause stated in unambiguous terms that for any and all ArcLight-sponsored events, both on-site and off-site, the vendor must implement a system of service that is verifiably random and equitable. It explicitly outlawed any service hierarchy based on donation level, corporate title, personal relationship, or any other status marker. It mandated that the order of service for all attendees, from the CEO to the custodial staff, must be determined by a randomized process, such as a lottery draw to be conducted publicly at the start of the event. The clause was a legal minefield designed to detonate at the first sign of favoritism. Once the draft was finalized, I attached it to the RFP master document. This was not a suggestion, it was now a non-negotiable condition of the contract. Any bidder would have to sign off on Section 11.7 to even be considered. The first bolt was slid into place. My next step was to fortify the reporting structure. An anonymous tip is only as powerful as the channel it travels through. I bypassed ArcLight's standard HR-managed ethics hotline, deeming it too porous for my purposes. Instead, I used a portion of my discretionary department budget to purchase a subscription to a third-party encrypted reporting service, the kind used by investigative journalists. I configured a new portal accessible via a QR code that I would later embed in cafeteria signage. All submissions would be routed directly to a newly created sterile email address, one linked to a secure server I controlled. The access logs were double encrypted, ensuring that even the identity of a person checking the reports would be masked. I named the portal the Fairplate Initiative. It was a direct line to me, a silent digital listening post. The second bolt slid home. With the framework in place, I initiated the official communication. I drafted an email to all 7 vendors who had submitted proposals, including Finch and Fowl Catering. The subject line was neutral, IFP SVC 202-2504 Addendum and Resubmission Request. The body of the email was brief and professional. It stated that due to an update in ArcLight's Corporate Social Responsibility Guidelines, a new clause, Section 11.7, had been added to the RFP. All bidders were required to review the addendum and resubmit their proposals confirming their ability to comply with all terms. The deadline for resubmission was 10 business days. No exceptions. I hit send. The clock was now ticking. Not for me, but for them. The fourth action was to create the stage. A proposal is just paper. Compliance is proven in practice. I amended the final stage of the selection process. The top 2 finalists would be required to participate in a culinary capabilities demonstration, a test lunch served to a cross-section of 200 ArcLight employees. The email I sent to my own senior leadership team framed it as a morale-boosting event and a practical final test. What I did not include in that email was that I had already scheduled a surprise, real-time audit with our internal compliance department, who would be present as unannounced observers. They would be there to witness, document, and validate any and all violations of Section 11.7. The trap was now baited. That afternoon, in the privacy of my project management software, I created a new file to house all related documentation, the revised RFP, the schematics for the whistleblower portal, the legal review of the new clause, the audit plan. I had to give the project a name. The cursor blinked on the screen. I typed 2 words, second plate. It was a name no one else would understand. It was a promise to my children, codified in the sterile language of a corporate project file. The work at ArcLight was the mechanism of my response, but its soul needed a different kind of home. That evening, after Evan and Mila were asleep, I went back to my laptop. I did not search for legal precedents or corporate loopholes. I opened my state's online business registration portal. With a quiet series of clicks and a credit card payment, I filed the incorporation documents for a new non-profit organization. The process was methodical, almost robotic. It was named Second Plate Kids, its stated mission to ensure every child has access to a first-class meal because no child should ever be made to wait for leftovers. I designated myself as the registered agent and initial director. I was building more than a case. I was building an alternative, a place to redirect the resources my family was so desperate to secure. The next piece of the puzzle was the audio file. It was sitting on my watch, a small, potent piece of raw data. I transferred it to a secure drive, then uploaded it to a digital evidence vault, a service used by law firms to preserve the chain of custody. The platform encrypted the file and sealed it with a cryptographic timestamp, creating an immutable record of the file's existence and its contents at that exact moment in time. It was now evidence. It sat in the dark, silent and waiting. A single, perfect bullet in the chamber. It would not be used as a threat, it would be used as a verdict. Everything was in place, the legal framework, the reporting channel, the stage for the final test, the moral counterpoint, the key piece of evidence. The structure was complete. Every door was locked. Every window was barred. All that was left was to invite them in. I picked up my phone. I scrolled to Tessa's name, my thumb hovering over the icon. I thought about the years of practice smiles, of swallowing my words, of accepting my place. My children's faces flashed in my mind, Evan's downcast eyes, Mila's small, still hand. I typed out the message. The words appearing on the screen, bright and benign, "Hi, Tessa. Great news. The ArcLight Sponsorship Committee loved the West Haven Fund's proposal. We are moving to a final decision. I'd love to have you, Colin, and Mom and Dad come to ArcLight headquarters next Thursday for the final presentation and what we hope will be the official signing ceremony. Make it a family celebration. Bring the kids. I reread the message once. It was friendly. It was encouraging. It was a lie. I pressed send. The invitation was delivered. The guests were on their way. They thought they were coming for a signing. They had no idea they were coming for an audit. The 10-day response window was a quiet, stretched-out silence. It was a test of nerve. In the world of corporate procurement, silence is a language. It can mean a bidder is scrambling to meet a new demand, or it can mean they are walking away from the table. I spent those days in the meticulous rhythm of my job, reviewing other contracts, attending meetings, my face a mask of professional calm, but a small part of my brain was a dedicated processor, running a constant low-level scan, waiting for a single email. It arrived on the 9th day at 4:52 p.m., just as the office was beginning to empty. The sender was Marcus Thorne, the Vice President of Business Development at Finch and Fowl Catering. The subject was the required resubmission. My pulse remained steady as I opened it. The attached proposal was updated with a signed acknowledgement of the new Section 11.7. On the surface, they had complied, but the body of the email contained the hook. Dear Ms. Lane, it began. We are pleased to resubmit our proposal and confirm our full compliance with all of ArcLight's updated protocols, including the Event Service Equity Protocol. We at Finch and Fowl are fully committed to a fair and equitable experience for all ArcLight employees. Then came the paragraph I was waiting for. Separately, it continued, we understand the unique needs of executive-level functions and high-value stakeholder events. To that end, we would be pleased to offer ArcLight's leadership team a complimentary consultation to develop an executive priority package. This is an à la carte suite of services designed to provide an enhanced, seamless experience for key personnel. We believe in providing the right service for the right audience. It was a beautifully crafted piece of corporate doublespeak. They had signed the contract for banning a tiered system, and in the same breath, offered a tiered system under a different name. Executive Priority Package. Enhanced, seamless experience. The right service for the right audience. It was the language of privilege, sanitized for a boardroom. They were testing the wall I had built. Looking for a private gate. I let the email sit for an hour. My response needed to be a scalpel, not a hammer. At 6:15 p.m., from the quiet of my empty office, I replied, Mr. Thorne, thank you for the revised proposal regarding the Executive Priority Package. Could you please provide a detailed presentation or document outlining what this enhanced experience entails for our internal review? We require full transparency on all potential service offerings. Regards, Mara Lane. I was not accusing, I was asking. I was creating a paper trail, forcing them to define their euphemism in concrete terms. I hit send and went home. The response came faster than I expected. The next morning, a new email from Marcus Thorne was at the top of my inbox. Of course, it read, please see the attached presentation deck for an overview of our tiered service philosophy. We are confident you will find it aligns with ArcLight's commitment to excellence. I downloaded the attachment. It was a 12-slide PowerPoint presentation, slick with corporate branding. The title slide read, The Finch and Fowl Priority Ladder, a paradigm for bespoke service. I clicked through. There were slides with stock photos of smiling, diverse actors pretending to be employees. There were graphs with soaring upward curves. And then, on slide 7, I found the heart of it. It was a pyramid diagram, a graphic representation of their tiered service philosophy. The pyramid was divided into 3 sections. The bottom, widest section was labeled Tier 3, General Staff and Families. The services listed were standard buffet access and scheduled service windows. The middle section, Tier 2, Management and Key Partners, offered expedited service line and reserved seating. And then there was the top, the pinnacle of the pyramid, colored in a deep, authoritative navy blue. The label was Tier 1, Donor Families and Executive Leadership. The listed perks were immediate first call service, private buffet station, and dedicated at-table attendant. I stared at the screen. They had actually put it in writing. They had taken the unwritten, unspoken rule of my childhood and turned it into a corporate strategy document, complete with logos and bullet points. Donor families. Executive leadership. They had merged my two worlds into a single, damning phrase. This wasn't just a violation of my new clause, this was their entire business model. It was a blueprint for a world where some people are simply more important than others, and they were selling it as a premium service. Without a moment's hesitation, I composed a new email. The recipient was Amelia Vance, the head of ArcLight's Legal and Compliance Department. I attached the presentation deck. Amelia, I wrote, please review the attached document from a bidding vendor. I am flagging this under Section 11.7 of IFPSVC 202-2504. The proposed priority ladder appears to represent a significant compliance risk and may constitute discriminatory practice based on employee status. The proposed priority ladder appears to represent a significant compliance risk and may constitute discriminatory practice based on employee status. Please advise. I copied my own anonymous Fairplate Initiative email address in the BCC field, creating another layer in the official record. I sent the email and felt the satisfying click of another tumbler falling into place. The matter was now officially on the radar of the company's legal counsel. The deck gave me a new lens through which to examine the West Haven Harvest Fund. The phrase donor families echoed in my head. I went back to the fund's public filings, pulling up the financial statements I had downloaded weeks before. This time, I wasn't just looking for a name, I was looking for a pattern. I focused on the expenses for the last major donor gala, the one Finch and Fowl had catered. The line item for event catering logistics was enormous, nearly 40% of the entire event budget. It was an unusually high figure, even for a high-end caterer. It was inflated. I started cross-referencing dates. I dug into Finch and Fowl's public-facing marketing materials archived on their website. I found a press release from the same quarter as the gala. It announced a new community partnership initiative offering strategic marketing discounts to select non-profit partners. The West Haven Harvest Fund was the first partner they named. The pieces snapped together. Finch and Fowl would overcharge the charity for an event, inflating the official cost. Then, under a separate marketing agreement, they would give a portion of that money back to the charity as a sponsorship, for which they received a tax deduction and public goodwill. It was a perfectly legal, if ethically murky, loop. The fund got a cash infusion, and Finch and Fowl got a tax-advantaged way to secure their loyalty, ensuring that the donor families like mine would always be at the top of the pyramid. It was a system designed to perpetuate itself, funded by well-meaning donors who had no idea how the money was actually moving, as if on cue. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text from Tessa. Mara, so excited for Thursday. Mom has a wonderful idea. She wants to make the signing ceremony a real family celebration. For the photos, she thinks it would be best if my kids could be served their lunch first. It would make for a lovely shot, showing ArcLight's commitment to family and the next generation. Can you arrange that? I read the text twice. The audacity was breathtaking. They weren't just walking into the trap, they were dancing into it. They were so secure in their world, so accustomed to their rules, that they couldn't even conceive of a situation where those rules wouldn't apply. They wanted to perform the very act I had outlawed on camera, at the headquarters of the company whose rules they were breaking. My fingers were steady as I typed my reply. Of course, that's a lovely idea. The children will eat first. I sent it. The message was delivered, a benign promise that was also a final confirmation. The last piece of preparation was physical. The day before the signing ceremony, I requisitioned a set of visitor badges from security. They were standard-issue plastic cards with a clip. One of them, however, was slightly thicker. I had ordered it online. A high-resolution microcamera and audio recorder, perfectly disguised as a corporate ID badge. The lens was a tiny, invisible pinprick in the center of a fake ArcLight logo. I charged it overnight. It would be my personal, impartial observer. It would capture everything, the smiles, the handshakes, the requests for special treatment, the moment the ice beneath the soup pot finally gave way. The main atrium of ArcLight Dynamics was designed to inspire awe. A 4-story ceiling of glass and steel arched over a polished terrazzo floor. And today, it was draped in banners of deep corporate blue. Community first, one proclaimed. ArcLight West Haven, Partners in Progress, read another. The slogans were bright, optimistic, and hollow. They were the set dressing for a play whose real script had been written in secret. My family arrived as if they owned the building. My mother, Ruth, immediately began directing a small photo shoot with the ArcLight logo, positioning Tessa and a beaming Colin in the foreground. Tessa was radiant in a tailored dress, the very picture of a successful philanthropist. They were the stars, and this was merely a new stage. I greeted them with a professional smile, handing them their pre-printed visitor badges. My mother's badge, the one with the hidden camera, felt slightly heavier in my palm as I clipped it to her blazer. She patted it absently, her mind already on the buffet. Mara, the spread looks divine, she said, her eyes scanning the long tables set up by Finch and Fowl. Marcus Thorne really outdid himself. I gave a non-committal nod. We hold our partners to a high standard. Evan and Mila stood beside me, quiet and overwhelmed by the scale of the room. I led them over to a designated seating area, where a few other employees had gathered with their children. I wanted my kids to be part of the ArcLight community, not the Lane family hierarchy. From across the atrium, I saw Amelia Vance, our head of legal, talking with 2 of her junior compliance officers. They were dressed in standard corporate attire, holding tablets, looking for all the world like mid-level managers. Amelia met my gaze for a fraction of a second, a flicker of an acknowledgement that was invisible to everyone else. The control room was online. My observers were in position. After a few minutes of mingling, I stepped up to the small podium at the front of the room. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to ArcLight Dynamics, I began, my voice amplified by the microphone, smooth and welcoming. We are so thrilled to be here today to celebrate a potential new partnership with the West Haven Harvest Fund, an organization doing such vital work in our community. I paused, letting my gaze sweep over my family. They were glowing. And to our potential new culinary partners, Finch and Fowl, thank you for this beautiful lunch. Before we eat, I continued, my tone shifting to one of cheerful efficiency. We are going to kick things off with a small, fun part of ArcLight's new Fair Plate initiative. On the massive digital screen behind me, the ArcLight logo dissolved and was replaced by the crisp black and white text of Section 11.7. In the spirit of equity and community, I announced, service today will be determined by a randomized lottery. All employee and guest numbers have been entered into a generator, and we will be serving lunch in groups of 10. It ensures everyone gets the same fair, first-class experience. A ripple of surprise went through the crowd, mostly appreciative murmurs, but at the front table, the atmosphere had dropped 20 degrees. Tessa's smile was gone, replaced by a tight line of disbelief. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Mara, what is this? Her voice was a sharp whisper that carried in the sudden quiet. She walked towards me, her heels clicking an angry rhythm. Can we talk for a second? She tried to pull me away from the podium, but I stood my ground. My children are tired and hungry, she said, her voice rising slightly, adopting the tone of a deeply concerned mother. They are not used to this kind of wait. Surely, we can just let the children eat first. It was the same argument, the same appeal to emotion, the same assumption of privilege. But this was not St. Calder's Church Hall. I didn't answer her directly. Instead, I raised a hand and pointed to the screen behind me, my finger aiming at the key phrase. The tech operator, following my pre-arranged instructions, zoomed in so the words filled the entire screen. No priority based on status. Tessa stopped. She stared at the words, her face a mixture of confusion and fury. The rule was no longer a quiet family understanding. It was a corporate mandate, projected 12 feet high for everyone to see. She was speechless. Colin, ever the strategist, moved to intercept. He didn't approach me. He smoothly made his way over to Marcus Thorne, the Finch and Fowl VP, who was standing near the buffet. I watched as Colin leaned in, his hand on Thorne's shoulder, his expression a mask of friendly concern. He was whispering, his head tilted towards Tessa's children. Thorne nodded, a quick, almost imperceptible dip of his head. He then turned and caught the eye of his catering manager. A silent command was given. I kept my eyes on the buffet line. I saw the manager say something to a young server. The server nodded, then walked casually to the end of the table. With a swift, practiced movement, she slipped a small laminated card from her apron pocket and slid it underneath the silver serving tray of macaroni and cheese. A kid-friendly favorite. The card was small, but from my angle, I could just make out the glittering letters, VIP family. I glanced over at Amelia Vance. She was looking right at the server, her expression neutral. She tapped her screen twice, updating the silent digital ledger of the audit. The violation was recorded, time-stamped, irrefutable. The trap, so carefully set, had been sprung. Now it was time to reveal the walls. I turned back to the podium. All right, let's get our first group, John. Can we have the first number, please? The tech operator hit a button. The number generator on the screen spun and landed on Group 3. Group 3, come on up. I announced cheerfully. A mix of people began to stand, a few engineers from the third floor, a marketing intern, one of our custodial staff members with his wife and son, and by a remarkable stroke of coincidence, Evan and Mila. My family remained seated, their faces thunderous. They were in Group 7. As my children walked toward the buffet, I gave a small, almost invisible nod to the tech booth. It was the signal. The second plate test was now live. A subtle change occurred at the buffet. The heat lamps over the main serving line, the one closest to the crowd, switched off with a soft click. The food there remained, but it was no longer the primary offering. Simultaneously, a previously unnoticed, sleek mobile induction heating station was wheeled out from a side alcove by two Finch and Fowl staff members who had been briefed by me, not their manager. On it were fresh, steaming trays of the exact same food, the roasted chicken, the macaroni and cheese, the steamed vegetables. This was the A line, the real first serving. The server at this new station, an ArcLight employee I had personally assigned, smiled warmly at my son. Welcome, Evan. What would you like to start with, Evan and Mila? Along with the other members of Group 3, they were served generous, hot portions from the fresh trays. The main buffet line, the one with the hidden VIP card, sat untouched. A confused murmur spread through the atrium. People were noticing the two separate lines, the redirection of service. They were seeing my children, the child of a janitor, and the children of engineers, all being served together, first, with the best food. I looked at my mother. Her face was ashen. The public nature of it, the deliberate, systematic dismantling of her authority, was a wound far deeper than any private argument. She stood up and walked toward me, her movements stiff with rage. "Mara," she hissed, her voice low and venomous, "just for me. What do you think you're doing? You are embarrassing this family in front of everyone." I leaned into the microphone, my voice calm and clear, carrying to every corner of the silent room. "I'm not embarrassing anyone, Mother," I said, my eyes meeting hers. "I am simply returning the first plate after 34 years of waiting. I am making sure my children eat first." My mother's accusation hung in the air, a toxic cloud in the sterile atrium. The murmuring of the crowd had ceased. There was only the low hum of the building's ventilation system, and the sound of my own steady breathing. I did not look at her. I turned my back on her fury, and on the wreckage of my family at the front table, and faced the audience, my stage, my rules. I gave another subtle signal to the tech operator in the booth. The screen behind me, which still showed the phrase "no priority based on status," went black for a single dramatic second before a new image resolved into view. It was a PowerPoint slide, a pyramid diagram in shades of corporate blue and gray. It was slide 7 from Finch and Fowle's presentation deck. As part of their revised proposal, I announced, my voice devoid of emotion, a narrator stating facts. Finch and Fowle provided this document, which they called the Finch and Fowle Priority Ladder, a paradigm for bespoke service. I let the audience read the text in the pyramid. Tier 3, General Staff and Families, Tier 2, Management and Key Partners, and at the top, Tier 1, Donor Families and Executive Leadership. As you can see, I continued, using my laser pointer to circle the top tier. The vendor's business model is explicitly designed to create a system of preferential treatment in direct and material violation of the Section 11.7 clause they signed. I clicked the button on my remote. The view on the screen zoomed into the bottom right corner of the slide. There, small but unmistakable, was the cheerful, stylized wheat sheaf logo of the West Haven Harvest Fund, displayed as a case study in successful partnership. The link was no longer an inference, it was an endorsement. I'd now like to invite Amelia Vance, our General Counsel, to provide the official determination from ArcLight's Compliance Department. Amelia walked to the podium, her expression grim and unassailable. She did not look at Marcus Thorne, who stood frozen by the buffet, his face pale with disbelief. She addressed the room. Pursuant to an internal audit, Amelia began, her voice the embodiment of legal certainty. The Compliance Department has found Finch and Fowle Catering to be in breach of the terms of the request for proposal. Their documented service model, as illustrated here, represents a fundamental violation of the ArcLight Vendor Code of Conduct and the newly instituted Event Service Equity Protocol. Effective immediately. Finch and Fowle's bid is disqualified, and they are suspended from all future ArcLight procurement processes for a period of no less than 24 months, pending a full investigation into their business practices. It was an execution delivered in the bloodless language of corporate governance. Marcus Thorne looked as if he'd been physically struck. His mouth opened, but no words came out. I stepped back to the microphone as Amelia stepped away. "This documented model is not a hypothetical," I stated. "It is a practiced reality, a reality that extends beyond the boardroom and into the community events that this company sponsors." I nodded to the tech booth. "John, please play audio exhibit A." A crisp digital silence fell, and then from the powerful speakers mounted throughout the atrium came the sound of my mother's voice. It was a high-fidelity recording, capturing the exact timbre of her conspiratorial whisper, "Let Tessa's kids eat first. Tell yours to wait for what's left." A collective intake of breath swept through the room. My mother flinched, her hand flying to her throat, as if to stop the words that were already echoing in the vast space. The recording continued, now playing Tessa's voice, honeyed and condescending. It's just the fund's priority rules. The bigger donors get to go first. It encourages giving. The audio cut out, leaving a silence that was heavier and more profound than before. Everyone stared at my family. Tessa, her face chalk white, instinctively shrank back, her hand fumbling until it found my mother's arm. She clutched it, a child seeking refuge from a monster she herself had helped create. The screen changed again. This time, it displayed a simple table, 2 columns. Column A, I said, my voice cutting through the silence, is a line item from the West Haven Harvest Fund's official expense report for their last gala, showing a payment of $75,000 to Finch and Fowl for catering services. Column B is an entry from Finch and Fowl's own marketing ledger from the same date, showing a payment of $25,000 back to the West Haven Fund, categorized as a co-marketing spend. I let the numbers sink in. It is a classic kickback scheme, designed to inflate costs for accounting purposes while funneling tax-deductible sponsorship money back to the fund. A financially symbiotic relationship built on a shared philosophy of exclusion. Colin Morrow, who had been standing rigidly beside Tessa, finally broke. A tremor of fear ran through him. He had underestimated me. They all had. They saw a daughter, a sister. They had forgotten they were standing in the office of a procurement director. This partnership, I said, turning the knife, wasn't just implicit, it was explicit. The final image appeared on the screen. It was a screenshot of an email. The sender, Colin Morrow. The recipient, Marcus Thorne. The date was from 3 months prior. This email was flagged by our internal server audit, which is standard procedure for all high-value contracts. I lied smoothly. I had found it myself through other means. In it, Mr. Morrow, a family member of the West Haven Fund's leadership, suggests to a bidding vendor that a mutually beneficial arrangement could be reached, contingent on ensuring that key stakeholders and their families receive the level of service they deserve. The email specifically proposes a priority system to demonstrate this commitment. Colin's signature, a confident, arrogant scroll, was clearly visible at the bottom of the email. He looked as if the floor had vanished from beneath his feet. The PR expert, the master of spin, was exposed by his own digital trail. I turned away from the screen and faced the front row where the senior executives of ArcLight sat, their faces grim. As the director of procurement, I said, making my formal recommendation, I must conclude that the West Haven Harvest Fund and its leadership have engaged in unethical practices, have failed to disclose multiple conflicts of interest, and are philosophically misaligned with the core principles of this company. I recommend the immediate and permanent termination of any and all sponsorship considerations. David Webb, ArcLight's executive vice president, stood up. He was a man whose face rarely betrayed emotion, but today, his jaw was tight with anger. I concur, he said, his voice booming in the silent room. The signing ceremony is cancelled. This partnership is terminated. The ArcLight board will convene in 1 hour to review these findings and determine if further legal action is warranted. The verdict was delivered. The public humiliation was total. But I wasn't finished. There is one final piece of business, I said, my voice steady. The CSR budget of $50,000 that was allocated for this event was contingent on a successful partnership. As that partnership has failed, our corporate charter allows for the immediate reallocation of those funds to a qualifying organization. Today, ArcLight is making its first official donation to a new local nonprofit, one whose entire mission is built on the principle of food equity for children. I paused. Please welcome the founding director of Second Plate Kids. I stepped away from the podium. I took 2 steps to the side, turned, and then stepped back behind it. A wave of stunned understanding washed over the room. I am the director, I said simply. And on behalf of the children we will serve, I continued, I accept this generous donation. That was the final straw for my mother. She pushed through the stunned silence, her face a mask of incandescent rage. She stopped directly in front of me, her body trembling, her voice a low, ragged gasp. But in the quiet, everyone heard it. You dare, she whispered, her voice cracking. You dare stand there and do this. You dare defy your own mother. I leaned forward, my lips almost touching the microphone, my gaze locked on hers, two chips of ice. I felt no anger, no pain, only the cold, clean snap of a debt finally being paid. I am not defying you, mother, I said, and my voice, clear and steady, filled every corner of the room. A final, irrevocable judgment. I am defying leftovers. The immediate aftermath of the public detonation was a controlled, silent chaos. David Webb, ArcLight's EVP, had spoken with the authority of a judge passing sentence, and the atrium began to clear out as if on his command. Employees, sensing the shift from corporate event to corporate crisis, returned to their desks, their faces a mixture of shock and fascination. My family was not allowed to leave. They were escorted by a stony-faced Amelia Vance and two members of ArcLight's internal security team to a glass-walled conference room on the mezzanine level, a fishbowl for them to wait in while the executives convened. I did not join the board meeting. My role as the primary fact-finder and a party of interest made my presence there inappropriate. Instead, I went to a small, empty office adjacent to the main conference room, a sterile space with a single desk and a computer terminal. It was my designated command center. I needed to document everything that had just occurred, to translate the raw, emotional spectacle into the precise, dispassionate language of a formal incident report. The adrenaline had begun to fade, replaced by a cold, humming focus. My fingers moved across the keyboard, typing out a chronological summary, citing the specific violations, time-stamping the key events. It was methodical work, the kind of process-driven task that had always been my refuge, the noise of the atrium, the weight of my mother's glare, the sight of Tessa's crumbling composure. All of it receded as I focused on the screen. And then, a small notification icon appeared in the bottom corner of my monitor. A new email. It was not sent to my primary ArcLight address, but to the sterile, encrypted account I had set up for the Fairplate Initiative, the whistleblower portal. My heart, which had been beating at a slow, steady rhythm, gave a single hard thump against my ribs. I clicked open the email. There was no subject line. The sender was an anonymous, scrambled address. The body of the message contained a single sentence: "You missed the real payment structure." Below the text was a single attachment, a password-protected spreadsheet file. A second email arrived seconds later, with a 16-character alphanumeric password. My hands felt suddenly cold. This was not part of my plan. This was an unscheduled event, an unknown variable. I entered the password. The spreadsheet opened. It was not a polished corporate document. It was a raw data ledger, a simple table of dates, payment amounts, and routing numbers. The header read, FF Off-Book Partner Disbursements. Finch and Fowl. The payments, ranging from $5 to $15,000, were made monthly over the past 2 years. But the recipient was not the West Haven Harvest Fund. The recipient was a company I had never heard of, Morrow PR LLC. A cold dread, sharp and clarifying, washed over me. Morrow. I opened a new browser tab, and ran a state corporate registry search. The result came back in under 3 seconds. Morrow PR LLC. Registered agent and sole proprietor, Colin Morrow. My brother-in-law, my sister's husband. It was a shell corporation, a pass-through. Finch and Fowl wasn't just engaged in a tax-advantaged kickback scheme with the charity, they were making direct, off-the-books payments to Colin. My mind raced, recalibrating the entire equation. This wasn't just about unethical business practices. This was likely fraud. I scrolled through the spreadsheet, my eyes scanning the notes column. Most entries were blank, but a few had brief descriptions. I froze. One entry from 7 months prior, for the sum of $10,000, had a note attached. It read, Consulting fee Strategic Alignment for Family-Centric Event Services. Another, from 3 months ago, Retainer for Priority Queuing Implementation Strategy. Priority queuing. The phrase hit me like a physical blow. It was the sanitized corporate jargon for deciding who eats first, for deciding whose children get the hot food and whose get the leftovers. A sudden, chilling thought struck me. I pulled up my personal calendar on my phone, my thumb scrolling back through the months. I found the first date from the spreadsheet with a detailed note. 7 months ago, a Saturday. My calendar entry read, Birthday party at the community park. I remembered that day. My parents and Tessa's family had shown up an hour late. When it came time for cake, my mother had insisted that Tessa's children, the guests, should get their slices first. Evan had waited, his face a small, tight knot of disappointment. I cross-referenced the next date, 3 months ago, a Sunday afternoon barbecue at my parents' house. The spreadsheet note read, Priority Queuing Implementation. My own memory supplied the context. My father at the grill. My mother directing traffic. Mara, let Colin and Tessa's kids get their burgers first, she had said. They have to leave early. We were the last to eat. The patties cold by the time we got them. It wasn't random. It wasn't just a deeply ingrained family dysfunction. It was a paid service. It was a product. Colin had monetised my mother's cruelty. He had taken the private, petty hierarchy of our family and packaged it as a strategic alignment for Finch and Fowl, a way for them to test and refine their priority ladder model in low-stakes social settings, before deploying it for corporate clients. My children had not been the victims of a mere family bias. They had been the unpaid, unwilling beta testers for a commercial product. The coldness in my veins turned to ice. This was the handshake in the dark, the secret mechanism that drove the entire system. I stood up, my movements precise and controlled. I picked up the desk phone and dialed Amelia Vance's extension. Amelia, I said, my voice flat. I need you and the head of internal security in conference room 4B now. And bring them with you. I disconnected the call before she could reply. The conference room was a smaller, more intimate version of the fishbowl they had been waiting in. No glass walls, just a heavy wood door that I closed with a solid, definitive click. My mother, Tessa, and Colin were sitting at a long mahogany table, their initial fury having curdled into a sullen, anxious silence. Amelia and a large, impassive man from security stood against the far wall. They all looked up as I entered. Tessa's eyes were red-rimmed. Mara, please, she began, her voice trembling. This has gone too far. It was just a misunderstanding. I ignored her. I placed my laptop at the head of the table and turned it so the screen faced them. I projected the spreadsheet onto the wall-mounted monitor. This is a payment ledger, I stated, from Finch and Fowl to a shell company called Morrow PR. The sole proprietor of that company is Colin Morrow. Colin's face went from pale to ghostly. He looked like a man who had just seen his own obituary. The payments are described as consulting fees, I continued, my voice as cold and hard as the polished table, for services such as strategic alignment for family-centric event services, and my personal favorite, priority queuing implementation strategy. Tessa frowned, confused. What does that even mean? I looked directly at her, letting the silence stretch for a beat. It means, I said slowly, that Colin was being paid to ensure your children ate before mine. At Evan's birthday party, at the 4th of July barbecue, at every family gathering for the past 2 years. It wasn't just Mom's preference, Tessa. It was a paid professional service. My children were the focus group. Tessa's face crumpled in horror. She turned to her husband, her expression one of dawning, sickening comprehension. Colin, is that true? Colin stared at the table, unable to meet her eyes. I didn't know, Tessa whispered, turning her desperate gaze to me. Mara, I swear. I had no idea. I just thought it was Mom being Mom. I didn't know he was being paid for it. Didn't you? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. I clicked to the next file. A document appeared on the screen. It was the original PR proposal from Maro PR to Finch and Fowl. This is the initial pitch, I said. It outlines the entire strategy. And this, I said, using the mouse to circle a line at the bottom of the page, is the digital signature of approval. It belongs to you, Tessa. She stared at her own name on the screen, as if it were a foreign word. I sign things for him all the time, she stammered. He told me it was just a standard marketing agreement for the fund. Her denial was a weak, pathetic shield against the mountain of evidence. I had no more words for her. I looked from her, to Colin, to my mother, who sat in stunned, absolute silence, the architect of a system she had allowed to be sold to the highest bidder. I reached forward and pressed a small button on the conference room's control panel. A small red light appeared, indicating the audio and video recording for official record-keeping was now active. I looked at them all, my face a mask of iron. This is no longer a family matter, I said, my voice clear and final, each word a nail in the coffin of our relationship. This is a corporate investigation into conspiracy, wire fraud, and the use of minor children in a commercial pilot program without consent. This is about the workplace. This is about company funds. And this is about children. No one spoke. The only sound in the room was the soft, rhythmic tick-tock of the large analog clock on the wall. Each tick was a beat, a moment of silence stretching into an eternity, a measured, relentless countdown to the final verdict. The ticking of the clock was the only sound, a precise mechanical heartbeat in a room where all human hearts had frozen. My mother, Tessa, and Colin were statues carved from shock. Amelia Vance and the security chief were the stoic guardians of the new reality. My reality. I did not wait for them to process the accusation of fraud. The time for private reckonings was over. I pressed another button on the conference room's control panel. This one patched me through to the security desk in the lobby. Send in the internal comms team, I said, my voice flat. It's time for the official statement. A moment later, the heavy door swung open. A woman from our communications department entered, followed by a cameraman. He was a professional, moving with a quiet efficiency that was almost unnerving. He raised the camera to his shoulder, and a small ruby-red light blinked on. It was a single, malevolent eye, and it was now the only thing in the universe that mattered. The private interrogation was now a public broadcast. I stood. I smoothed the front of my blazer, a gesture of pure, unadulterated control. I was no longer a daughter or a sister. I was an executive of ArcLight Dynamics delivering a corporate verdict. This is an official statement regarding the bidding process for RFPSVC 20224. I began, my voice clear and ringing with authority. I looked directly into the lens. The world beyond that lens, the employees watching on monitors in the atrium, the executives in the boardroom, the permanent digital record, was my audience. ArcLight Dynamics has terminated its consideration of Finch and Fowl Catering for the corporate services contract. A formal audit has revealed material breaches of our vendor code of conduct, including unethical conflicts of interest and fraudulent billing practices. Finch and Fowl is hereby banned from any and all ArcLight procurement processes for a period of 24 months. I paused, letting the finality of the sentence land. The red light on the camera seemed to burn brighter. Furthermore, I continued, my tone shifting slightly, becoming constructive, forward-looking. The corporate social responsibility budget of $50,000, previously allocated for this event, will be immediately redirected. ArcLight is proud to announce its inaugural partnership with a new nonprofit dedicated to ensuring food equity for children in our community. I allowed myself a small, sharp smile. This entire budget will be transferred to Second Plate Kids, an organization founded on a single, non-negotiable principle: kids eat first. The statement was made. The corporate position was clear. ArcLight was the hero. But I was not finished. The camera was still rolling. I turned my head slowly, deliberately, away from the lens and toward my mother. The cameraman, sensing the shift in tension, smoothly panned to follow my gaze, capturing us both in a tight two-shot. My mother stared at me, her face a canvas of disbelief and rage. "Mother," I said, my voice softening just enough to sound reasonable, almost gentle, which made the words themselves infinitely more cruel. "The evidence shows that minor children were used as unwitting participants in a paid commercial pilot program. On behalf of ArcLight, I would like to offer you the opportunity to address this. Would you like to take this moment to apologize to Evan and Mila?" Silence. The camera zoomed in on her face, on the way her jaw clenched, the utter vacancy in her eyes, as she searched for a response and found none. A choked sob broke the silence. It was Tessa. The camera shifted to her as she buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. "I'm sorry," she wept, her words muffled and pathetic. "I'm so sorry, Mara. I never thought. I didn't know it would become this." Her apology was not for my children, it was for herself. A lament for the consequences, not the act. I did not acknowledge it. I turned back to the camera, my face a mask of resolute principle. I was the face of the company now, the voice of its new, unshakable ethics. "Let me be unequivocally clear," I said, looking straight down the barrel of the lens. ArcLight Dynamics does not fund, support, or partner with any organization that operates on a model of bloodline priority. We do not recognize a hierarchy of personhood based on family ties. Our community comes first. All of it. As I spoke those final words, Amelia Vance gave a short, sharp nod to the head of security. The man stepped forward, moving behind Colin. He leaned down and spoke in a low, quiet voice that did not carry to the microphones. "Sir, you need to come with us." Colin didn't resist. The fight had drained out of him, leaving a hollowed-out shell. He stood up on unsteady legs, his expensive suit suddenly looking cheap and ill-fitting. He did not look at Tessa. He did not look at anyone. The security chief placed a firm, but not aggressive hand on his back and guided him toward the door. He was a ghost being quietly escorted from the building. The door clicked shut behind him. The camera was still on me in the atrium. The employees who had remained, watching the drama unfold on the internal monitors, began to clap. It was not a thunderous ovation. It was a slow, spreading wave of applause. The sound of decent people recognizing that a fundamental wrong had finally been made right. It was the sound of validation. I held my gaze on the camera for a moment longer, letting the applause become part of the official record. Then my eyes flickered away from the lens, scanning the crowd visible through the conference room door. I found him, Evan. He was standing near the seating area, his lunch plate held in his hands. He was looking right at me, his eyes wide, not with fear, not with confusion, but with a look of pure, unadulterated awe. And I saw it. The thing that made it all worth it. The small, almost imperceptible tremor that had always been present in his hands when he was forced to wait, when he was made to feel small, was gone. His hands were perfectly still. The red light on the camera blinked off, plunging the conference room into an anticlimactic quiet. The performance was over. What remained was the paperwork. Amelia Vance was already holding a tablet out to me. On the screen was a PDF, the official termination letter for Finch and Fowl Catering. The text was dense with legal clauses citing breach of contract, misrepresentation, and violations of the ArcLight Ethics Code. At the bottom was a single empty line. I took the stylus from her and, with a series of sharp, decisive strokes, signed my name. The signature was a clean, final cut. "This is effective immediately," I said to the security chief. "Their staff has 1 hour to clear their equipment from the atrium. Escort them out." He nodded. "And the family," I added, looking at my mother and Tessa. They were huddled together. 2 survivors of a shipwreck of their own making. My mother's rage had collapsed into a brittle, stunned silence. Tessa was still weeping, quiet, exhausted sobs. "They can leave whenever they like," I said. It was the most indifferent, and therefore the most complete, dismissal I could give. While security began the process of dismantling Finch and Fowl's presence, Amelia's team was already drafting the next document. It was a formal notification to the board of the West Haven Harvest Fund. It outlined the conflicts of interest, the evidence of financial malfeasance, and the immediate, indefinite suspension of all partnership and sponsorship discussions. It was a legal firewall, severing the last tendril connecting my professional world to their corrupt one. Amelia sent it from her laptop with a single, quiet click. A relationship of a lifetime, a potential multi-million-dollar corporate pipeline, was severed with the same effort it took to delete a piece of spam. My own final piece of administration was personal. I returned to the small office that had served as my command center. I logged into the state's online business portal. Navigating to the file for my newly incorporated nonprofit, I opened the section for corporate governance and bylaws. I began to type. I laid out the structure for the board, the rules for financial transparency, the mission statement, but the very first line of the charter, Article 1, Section 1, was the one that mattered. I typed the words slowly, engraving them into the foundation of the organization. No child will be served leftovers. Every child is entitled to the first plate. It was a mission statement. It was a promise. It was a verdict. I saved the document. And Second Plate Kids was no longer just an idea, it was an institution, born from the ashes of another. When I returned to the atrium, the transformation was already underway. The Finch and Fowl staff were gone. Their silver chafing dishes and polished serving utensils vanished. The banners proclaiming a partnership with West Haven had been taken down. In their place, a member of the ArcLight facilities team was setting up a simple, temporary sign on an easel near the entrance. It was a placard I had designed myself that morning, in bold, clean sans serif font. It read, "Second plate, first serve." It was the new name for the cafeteria. It was the new law of the land. I saw Tessa standing near a side exit, her purse clutched in her hand. She had composed herself, her face pale, but her eyes resolved with a last, desperate hope. She saw me and walked over, intercepting me before I could reach my children. "Mara," she said, her voice low and urgent. "We need to fix this. I know what it looks like, but we can start over as a family. We can go back." I looked at my sister, at the woman who had stood by and smiled while her children ate first. Over and over again, I saw the years of quiet complicity, the effortless acceptance of her own superiority. She wasn't asking for forgiveness, she was asking to reset the board, to go back to a game where she had always been the winner. "There is no going back, Tessa," I said, my voice quiet but absolute. Starting over doesn't happen in the back hallway after the damage is done. It doesn't begin with an apology for getting caught. I looked past her toward the serving station, where the lottery was continuing. Group 2 was now getting their food. Starting over, I said, my eyes fixed on the children in that line. Begins by paying back all the first plates. It starts by finding every single child who was ever told to wait, who was ever made to feel second best, and giving them their rightful turn. I finally turned my gaze back to her, and she flinched from the cold, clear truth in my eyes. It begins with serving the children, whose names you never even bothered to learn. I walked away from her, leaving her alone with the impossibility of that debt. Evan and Mila were waiting for me by the second plate station. Their own lunch was finished. I knelt down in front of them. "Do you see those kids over there?" I said softly, pointing to the small group of children waiting with the members of Lottery Group 1, who had patiently waited their turn after my children were served. It was the family of the custodial staff member, the logistics coordinator from the mail room, the people who were the invisible engine of the building. They were in the first group with you. Now it's their turn to serve. I had arranged it earlier. The first act of Second Plate Kids would not be a fundraiser, or a press release, it would be an act of service. Evan and Mila were given small, clean aprons. They went behind the serving counter with the ArcLight employee. The internal cameras, still broadcasting to the monitors around the building, captured the moment. Evan, my quiet, hesitant son, took a plate. He looked at the first child in line, a little girl in a bright pink dress, the daughter of one of our janitors. He smiled, a real, unburdened smile. "What would you like?" he asked, his voice clear and confident. Mila, ever my serious little girl, concentrated with all her might, as she used the large spoon to scoop macaroni and cheese onto a plate held by a young boy. She passed it to him carefully, a sacred offering. I watched them. I watched my children, who had been taught the shame of waiting, now learning the dignity of serving. I watched them give away the first plate freely and with joy. There was no victory in my heart. There was no gloating. I did not smile. I just let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding for 34 years. It was a slow, shuddering exhale, a release of pressure so immense I felt my shoulders physically drop. The weight of a lifetime of leftovers had finally been lifted. Across the atrium, I saw my mother. She had been watching the scene, her face unreadable. She turned, her back straight, her shoulders rigid. She walked toward the main exit, her steps measured and deliberate. She did not look back at me. She did not look back at her grandchildren. She was walking away from a world she no longer controlled, a world whose rules she no longer recognized. She simply left it behind. I did not. I stayed. I watched as the first table began to fill up, a mosaic of people from every level of the company. I watched the janitor sit down with the engineer, their children laughing together. I watched the table fill not according to status or wealth or bloodline, but according to the simple, unassailable justice of the lottery. I watched the new world being built, one plate at a time, and I saw that it was good. The applause faded, leaving a hum of profound stillness in the atrium. The camera, that single unblinking red eye, remained fixed on me. The employees, the executives, my children, they were all watching, waiting for the final scene. This was not a moment for a speech. The time for words, for evidence, for arguments was over. This was a moment for a declaration, a statement of the new and permanent law. I stepped back to the podium. The microphone was still live, carrying the sound of my breathing across the cavernous space. I didn't look at the audience. I didn't look at my family. I raised my hand and pointed to the simple, elegant sign that had replaced the banners of a failed partnership. The sign that read, "Second plate, first serve. Kids eat first," I said. The words were not loud. They were not angry. They were a statement of fact, as simple and as absolute as gravity. They were the principle upon which this new world would be built. They were the beginning and the end of the story. The overhead lights of the atrium, usually a soft ambient glow, seemed to focus with theatrical intensity on the serving stations. They illuminated the steam rising from the fresh trays of food, the glint of the clean serving spoons, the absence of any hierarchy. There were no reserved tables, no private stations, and most importantly, no small, glitter-dusted cards that read VIP family. Those artifacts of the old regime had been swept away, rendered meaningless, their power dissolved. The food was simply food, available to all. Its value determined not by the status of the person receiving it, but by the hunger it was meant to satisfy. Evan, my son, had finished his task behind the serving counter. But there was one more thing to do. He walked over to a young boy, the son of one of the building's security guards. The boy had been in the first lottery group, but had been shy, hanging back. Evan held out a plate freshly filled with roasted chicken, and a generous scoop of macaroni and cheese. It was the first plate served after the official proclamation had been made. A new first plate. He offered it to the boy, not as a handout, but as an honor. The little boy took the plate, his eyes wide. He looked from Evan to me. He smiled, a gap-toothed, brilliant smile of pure, uncomplicated happiness. "Thank you, Ms. Mara," he said, his small voice carrying in the quiet room. I looked at this child, a boy whose father spent his days watching over the safety of a building full of people who likely never learned his name. I saw the dignity in his son's eyes, the simple, profound joy of being seen, of being served first, not as a privilege, but as a right. I gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was the only answer that was necessary. Amelia Vance approached the podium. Holding a slim, leather-bound folder, she opened it on the lectern. It was the Memorandum of Understanding between Arclight Dynamics and Second Plate Kids. A single page, its text clean and direct, formalizing the transfer of the $50,000 grant. The cameraman moved in closer, the lens focusing on the document, on the blank line at the bottom. Amelia handed me a pen. Its weight was substantial in my hand. Tessa was still standing off to the side, a silent, wraith-like figure. She was a witness, nothing more, a relic of a past that had been surgically excised. Colin was gone. The nameplates of my parents were gone. They were no longer relevant to the proceedings. The only people who mattered now were the company I represented and the cause I had created. I put the pen to the paper. The camera zoomed in, capturing the motion of my hand, the press of the nib against the fiber of the page. I signed my name, Mara Lane, not as a daughter, not as a sister, but as the director of procurement for one entity and the founding director of the other. It was a bridge I had built myself, and now I was walking across it, leaving the smoking ruins of my old life on the other side. The ink was a dark, permanent black. The contract was sealed. There was nothing left to adjudicate. There was no one left to convince. The system that had governed my life, the quiet, cruel calculus of who was more important, who deserved more, who had the right to command, and who had the duty to wait, was broken. There were no more leftovers. The very concept had been abolished. You could not have leftovers if everyone was served from the same pot, at the same time, with the same spoon. The source of my family's power, the quiet domestic tyranny they had wielded for decades, had been neutralized. It had been exposed to the light and revealed for what it was, a petty, hollow construct with no place in a just world. I reached into my pocket and took out my phone. The screen was still on, the timer for the audio recording was still silently counting the seconds and minutes of this new era. I looked at the number, then pressed the red square at the bottom of the screen. The recording stopped. The file was saved. The evidence was complete. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. I would not need to listen to it ever again. I stepped away from the podium. My work here was done. I walked toward the main exit of the atrium, the same path my mother had taken, but where she had walked out on a world she had lost, I was walking out on a world I had won. I did not look back. The large glass and steel doors of the atrium began to close, their motion smooth and silent on hydraulic hinges. As the two sides met, there was a single, clean sound, a soft metallic thump as the magnetic lock engaged. It was the sound of a lid closing on a box. It was the sound of a story ending. It was over. The story was over.